Thank you, Daniel. It's great to be here with you this weekend, and I've already just grown to have a heart for the people that Daniel loves here. It's great to just have an affection for you as I see Daniel having an affection for you. It's hard to believe. So Daniel came to Lafayette, Indiana in 2001, you just said. So I've known them over 20 years, and so it's almost as long as I've known my own kids, who are 21 and 22 years old. So I can remember seeing your parents come into Faith Church and then me asking them to serve with me in something we called the career class, which was a singles ministry. So that was and they did such a great job in that ministry there. So I want to thank you, Daniel, for inviting me out, Pastor John as well. And let me just show you a picture of my family so that you know a bit about my family. So obviously this is me there, and in 1977 something amazing happened to me. Does anybody know what happened in 1977? Star Wars. Somebody knows their history. So Star Wars came out in 1977, and my mom took me, and by the way, we were standing in front of my mom's Christmas tree because my mom actually died suddenly about 2 years ago, and we brought her Christmas tree home, and that was a year 2 years ago where we had her Christmas tree there. But my mom took me to see Star Wars, and from that point on in 1977, I was 9 years old, and I wanted to be like Luke Skywalker fighting the Death Star, and there's no like spaceships in Oklahoma. So what I had to do was set my foot on the path to be the closest thing I could to Luke Skywalker, and that was going to be an astronaut. And there's no spaceports in Oklahoma either, so the closest thing that I could do was to get my bachelor's in mechanical engineering from Oklahoma State University. They had an aerospace option at that point in time, so I did that. And the dean of engineering said to me this, and I do not say this to brag, I say this to show you where my heart was, because it wasn't entirely with God, it was with my own academic success and career. But he told me, Brent, if you don't go on to get your PhD in aerospace engineering, you're wasting your talents. And at the same time, there was a navigator who is a campus minister who began to disciple me, and he said to me, Brent, I would like you to consider going into ministry. And I wanted to be a hotshot astronaut. And he was asking me to go into ministry where I would never get another new car in my life. So I really did not consider ministry at that point in time because I wanted to be the hotshot astronaut. And so if you want to be a hotshot astronaut, you go to Purdue University because that's where men like Neil Armstrong graduated from. And so that's how I ended up at Purdue University. And there I was pursuing my master's of aerospace engineering degree. And it was during my time there, and I was a believer, but my goal was more on my academic career, my prestige, my honor, as opposed to serving God. But there at Purdue University, I was a very little fish in a very big pond. I don't know if you understand that metaphor, but at Oklahoma State, I was the big man on campus. I was the big fish in a little pond. At Purdue University, there were so many more people that were smarter than me. And frankly, if you know Purdue University, and Daniel was there ministering, we have, I think in the Big Ten at Purdue University, there was many, many more Asian students there. And there were many more Asian students smarter than me. And so I began to, if my entire identity was based upon my academics, and there were so many more people smarter than me, that I went into a depression, frankly. And there was many reasons for that, but I didn't know how to handle it biblically. And I got connected to a local church, Faith Church, and that's actually where I'm a pastor at now. So I'll cut to the chase, though, here in the story. I began to want to build people, not rockets anymore. When I began to understand more about what I will call the sufficient scriptures, that the scriptures have answers for everything, not just our salvation, but for life after salvation. How do I handle parenting? How do I handle my career aspirations? And how do I handle things like marriage? So when I began to understand those things that I did not understand growing up, God gripped my heart, and I started wanting to build people and not rockets anymore. And so then Daniel read a list of all the other 3 degrees that I got after that to get more theological training. This is my wife, Janet, here in the middle. So Janet, she's going to be talking to us and coming alongside for a little bit and sharing some things during the parenting conference as well. My son is right here. This is Josh. He is currently studying to be a pastor at our seminary. And so it's kind of fun to have my son in the seminary that I lead, and he's actually a pastoral intern on staff here at Faith Church. And last year, he got married to Noelle at a COVID wedding. So last year in July. You talk about stress. I mean, when you're the host of the wedding, and you're trying to keep everybody safe. And we weren't having weddings in our church because weddings are typically on Saturday, and we didn't want anybody in the building on Saturday before Sunday. So it was just a very tense time. We ended up having the wedding in a barn in Indiana, and I was so thankful. After 2 weeks after the wedding, so 2 weeks after the wedding, there was no COVID outbreak from our wedding. So I was very thankful for that, and God provided in a great way there. And this is my daughter, Karis. She graduated from Purdue University in microbiology. She told us the other day that, she found out that during her college years at Purdue University, she really used all of her spare time to kind of serve in the church. And she ended up, after she graduated, getting a job at the church instead of biology because she enjoyed serving at the church. So currently, right now, that entire group, including my daughter-in-law, who's a teacher at Faith Christian School, that entire group right there is working at the church. Apparently, we're taking over the church. So it is a blessing to have my children. One of the desires as a pastor, as our children kind of grow up and they see some of the hardships of pastoring, not that the hardships of pastoring are any necessarily different than another job. Every job has its difficulties. But I am thankful that my kids did not kind of just rebel against pastoring. But right now, God has given them a heart for ministry, and I'm very thankful for that. So our kids are essentially out of the home, although my daughter is going to move back in July just to accumulate. As she's got a job at the church, she'll move back into my home for a little while until she can get enough saved up so that she can go out and place a down payment on maybe an apartment or something like that and find a roommate there. So that's a little bit about our family. Now, we're talking this morning or this evening about foundations of parenting. I don't know exactly why you came here. Did you come here to get some parenting tricks? If I could just make my kids behave, if I could just get my infant to sleep through the night, man, that would be great. If I could just get my preteen to obey. I don't want to overpromise. That's not what I'm going to do here for you today. Okay, so parenting is challenging. So this is the place where you're discipling the most. And, Pastor John, Pastor Daniel, they know that pastoring and discipling is challenging. But even with pastoring, you get to leave your disciples. After Sunday, you get to go to your office and leave your disciples for a little bit. You get a break from your disciples. But parenting, you don't get a break from those kids. You don't. So you're living with those disciples 24/7 until they're 18, well, 20, well, maybe they end up staying with you until you're 28 or something like that, but you're with them constantly. So parenting actually reveals our hearts. And that's the challenge in parenting. And here's my goal for us today, or in this seminar. My goal is not to give you the latest tips and tricks that I used in order to get my kids to obey. Okay, so I cannot make my kids obey. I can kind of intimidate them into obeying when they're small, but sooner or later they're going to get bigger than you, and you may not can intimidate them anymore. So here's what I want us. I want us to achieve something that is actually doable. I can't make your children obey, and frankly, you can't either. But here's what we can do. We can begin to discuss the essential heart and practice of you, the parents. So discussing your hearts and discussing your practice in pointing our children. I can't make them love God, but I can point them to their incomparable, and I'm using that term very specifically. There's nothing like our God. So discussing the heart, and your practice that point them to the incomparable God, so that they might see in you, if we're praying, if we're begging God to help us, so that they might see in you that your God is better than anything else on this earth. Okay? Now, I want to say this also as we start, that I know when I teach this at my church, there are parents with prodigal children, meaning that they're not walking with the Lord, and that's breaking your heart as a parent. So there are parents like that in our church, and I'm sure right now in your church right here, there are some struggles and some moms and some dads that are deeply grieved right now over the path that your child is taking. So I know that, but here's one of the things I want to remind you, okay? So remember this. God only has prodigal children. So he knows your pain. He knows your pain. Our Father only has prodigal children except one, and that was his Son. So I don't know where you are right now, but our Father in heaven only has prodigal children except one. Okay, so now let me tell you where we're going today. It would be great sometime this weekend if you could read this article, When Kids Won't Bow to Your Idols. You may not know the term idolatry when it comes to our own hearts. That's okay, but that article is in your notes. So that'd be great if you could read that. And tonight, what we're going to do is start with our purpose. So we're going to talk about your purpose as a parent. Many times we think we know what our purpose is, but I submit to you often we are not operating on a biblical purpose in our parenting. And if you're not operating on a biblical purpose in your parenting, you're going to end up being frustrated and angry. It's hard enough when you're operating on your biblical purpose, but if I'm operating on a different purpose than what God has given us, then it's going to be that much harder. Okay? And our purpose precedes behavior. Your purpose, your child's purpose. If we want our kids to behave, which you can't control anyway, but they've got to know their purpose. And how are they going to know their purpose if you don't know yours? Because your purpose precedes your behavior as well. I know when we talk about parenting, it's primarily about behavior, but there's something before behavior that we want to make sure that we get right from the outset. Session number 2, which is tomorrow morning. Okay? Our primary issue in your children is a deceived heart. We're going to talk about the heart tomorrow morning, and know how your own deceived heart takes you away from God, so that you can understand why your children don't behave. And I know it's because of sin, we know that, but I'm going to show you a little bit more about the nature of where they're taking pleasure in that's not God, so that you can understand their behavior more. And frankly, that you understand your behavior more, and that'll give you compassion on your children. Now, when I'm talking about this tomorrow, okay, so tomorrow morning, the first one, during that session, I do talk about, I'm going to say it in this way, intimacy between a husband and wife. So I'm going to talk about that tomorrow morning and illustrate something regarding how we deal with that topic with our children. Okay, so when I start talking about it tomorrow, and if there's children present that you do not want to hear that, I'm going to give you a warning. Okay, and then if you want to leave, nobody will question, why are you leaving? So, but if you have your children here in the auditorium and you don't want them to hear that, I'm going to try not to be in any way explicit, but I will also mention how we taught our children about intimacy from a very early age. So if you don't want your children present here to hear that, then I'll give you like a warning, and then you can just exit, and then we will go from there, okay? Session number 3, we'll talk about our priorities as a parent, growing and knowing and living out God's answers for life, manhood, womanhood, marriage, emotions, relationship, all those things. How do we live those priorities out? And then life is about relationships. And finally, we'll talk about our path. And that's where we'll get into disciplining our children. I'm not starting with discipline. I'm not starting with behavior. I'm ending on that. But that's where we'll give a biblical grounding from the book of Proverbs about discipline. And this, our path that we're actually walking, will reveal what your original purpose was, where your delights are, and where your priorities are. So it all flows very sequentially here. And in all of this, we have to acknowledge and understand this. Folks, unless the Lord builds this house, we labor in vain. So in all of this, I want to just bathe all of our parenting in prayer. Psalm 127:1, unless the Lord builds this house, we labor in vain. Jen and I, our kids are adults now, and we don't have as much influence over them because they are adults. So we recognize even more right now the need for prayer. And I wish I would have prayed more when they were toddlers. Right now, I mean, our kids still talk to us. In fact, right before we came, we got a call from my son and his wife they just had a mom type of question, and they called us. So we have a great relationship with them. But our primary ministry right now with our kids is in prayer for them. And we didn't do all of that praying as much as we should have when they were younger, and we're realizing that now. Along the way, during our talks tonight and tomorrow, there is a danger of somebody like Janet and I coming along and talking to you about parenting. And after we've said that our kids are in church and they've got a ministry in church here, there's a danger in you thinking that we have it all together. And we pushed all the right buttons, and therefore our kids turned out, like a good picture of Christ. And so the danger of this is you thinking that we have it all together. And that's not what I want this parenting conference to accomplish. And the way that we're going to mitigate against that is for us to talk to you about many of our parenting fails. Okay, so Janet is going to be here and talking about those things. I'm going to share with you our parenting fails, some of them as well. So you know that I am just like you. I struggle, you struggle, and we all have issues. Our former senior pastor at my church back in Lafayette used to say, all of us are like the rest of us. All of us are like the rest of us. We have very, very similar struggles. So I don't want you to think in any way, that Janet and I have it all together, because we don't. Okay? So, and that's why we're going to share some of our parenting fails. Now, let me jump right into where I want us to go. This is on page 5 of your notes. I believe it's no, it's not page 5. It is page 4 on your notes. Okay? I want you to think about this question. What is the danger of not knowing your purpose in parenting? Okay? Sometimes we think our purpose, sometimes we think our purpose is something like this. I need to make sure my kid behaves. Or my purpose is something like this. I need to make sure I give my kids the best, so they will have the best education. They will have the best athletics that I can give them. They will have an easy life and not a hard life, because who wants to have a hard life? So my purpose as a parent is to begin to give them the best of everything. And I know that's a desire among us. My mom grew up, she was very, very poor. So in the 1930s, my grandfather grew up in the Depression, and in Oklahoma, if you remember what happened in the 1930s, it was the Dust Bowl there. And you may not know about Oklahoma, but he was a very, very poor farmer. And my mom never, ever had even a baby doll to play with. The only doll that she had ever was when she would cut out dolls from paper, and she would play with paper dolls that she would cut out. She was very, very poor. And my mom grew up wanting me to have the best of everything. And my mom and dad were not rich, but my mom made sure I had nice clothes. My mom made sure I ate well. So her goal with me was to make sure that I had the best of everything. And mom and dad did well to provide for me. But one thing that they probably struggled with is they never wanted me to have a hard time with anything. So here's what you can see about me. I was spoiled. I was spoiled as a child. And you can just ask my wife of how much hardship that has caused her. Okay? Okay? I love my mom, and she's with Jesus now. She was a believer, but I was probably a spoiled child, not knowing hardship very much. So as a parent, we can get into a difficult goal, a non-biblical goal of wanting our children to have an easy way of life and the best of everything. Okay? So here's a question for you. What is the danger of not knowing your biblical purpose? And let me show that to you. Let me show that to you from the story of Samson. Okay? So I'm going to start here with the story of Samson. And here is a man who did not understand his purpose. He didn't understand his purpose, and you're going to see that affected his behavior. Okay? Okay, now, the folks online, for just a moment, I'm going to repeat I'm about to ask the audience a question, an input, interactive question. So I will repeat what they say. So what do you know about Samson? Okay, just maybe raise your hand and shout it out, and then I'll repeat it so the guys online can hear. What do you know about Samson? Okay, what do you know about Samson? Samson was strong. God used him in a particular way in his strength. What else do you know about Samson? Okay, what else do you know about Samson? Yes, something about his hair, long hair. Okay, what else do you know about Samson? Is he a role model that you want all of your kids to grow up like? I see heads shaking. No. Okay. Okay. All right. So he's not a role model necessarily that you want him to grow up to be like. And I'm going to show you possibly why, or at least a reason why he did not behave in a particular way, because he did not understand his purpose. So I have on the screen for you Judges chapter 13. Now let me go through some of this with you, and I'm going to show you something about Samson. Okay? Now, Samson, his name in Hebrew means sun-like. S-U-N, bright, shining sun. Does anybody remember how Samson ends up at the end? How does he end up at the end of the story? And Daniel can't answer this. Pastor John can't answer this either. How does Samson end up at the end? Yes, he ends up blind. Isn't this ironic? The man whose name means sun or bright ends up in the darkness. And let's see why, and then apply it to our purpose. So verse 1, now the sons of Israel, and it just kind of went off there. Okay. Why don't you turn in your Bibles to Judges chapter 13. And I will read along with you. Oh, it's back on the screen. Okay, here we go. Now the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord gave them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. There was a certain man of Zorah, of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and had borne no children. Who does this sound like? Who does this sound like? His wife was barren and bore no children. Who does this sound like? Does it sound like anybody in previous theological history from this point? Who does it sound like? You're nodding your head. Abraham and Sarah. That's right. Okay, so God is going to do something very unique here with Samson. Okay? And if Israel has eyes to see, they should be saying, God is up to something here. So verse 3, then the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, behold, now you are barren, and you've borne no children, but you shall conceive and give birth to a son. Now therefore be careful not to drink wine or strong drink, nor eat any unclean thing. For behold, you shall conceive and give birth to a son, and no razor shall come upon his head. For the boy shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and now there was a certain set of behaviors there. Okay, not to drink, not to touch or eat any unclean thing, and not to cut his hair. And I'm not going to go through all why those were given to Samson, but there was a special set of behaviors that were to mark Samson. He had a very special set of behaviors because God was calling him for a special purpose, and that's in the very next phrase. For he shall begin to deliver Israel from the hands of the Philistines. Okay, now pause for just a second. There is his purpose. God gave Samson a purpose. He's going to be a deliverer. Okay? Samson was going to be a deliverer, and this boy was going to have a special set of behaviors that marked him as different than anybody else. Okay? So verse 6. And then the woman came and told her husband, saying, a man of God came to me, and his appearance was like the appearance of the angel of God, very awesome. And I did not ask him where he came, and he did not tell me his name. But he said to me, behold, you shall conceive and give birth to a son, and you shall not drink wine, so there's no drinking, nor eat any unclean thing, so touching dead things, consuming the unclean animals, for the boy shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death. That's what the wife told the husband. Is anything missing? Is anything missing from the angel's instructions? Did you see anything missing? Yes. The purpose. Now, why would a mother not want her son to be a deliverer? And this is a mother who's only had one son, because she's been barren all of her life, and now she's going to get a son. Why would she not possibly want her son to be a deliverer? Any thoughts? Because a deliverer would be engaged in military battles, and that might mean a sacrifice. He might die. He might die. Now you say, Brent, I don't know that that's really what the text is meaning. Maybe they just didn't have enough, parchment paper to write out all of the words, and they were just putting it in a Reader's Digest kind of version. Well, let's keep reading. Then Manoah entreated the Lord and said, "O Lord, please let the man of God whom you have sent come to us again, that he may teach us what to do for the boy who is to be born." And God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came again to the woman as she was sitting in a field, but Manoah, her husband, was not with her. So the woman ran quickly and told her husband, "Behold, the man who came the other day has appeared to me." And then Manoah arose and followed his wife. And when he came to the man, he said to him, "Are you the man who spoke to the woman?" And he said, "I am." And Manoah said, "Now when your words come to pass," look at what Manoah asked. "What shall the boy's mode of occupation be?" Okay, so Manoah did not know. And look at verse 13. The angel of the Lord said to Manoah, "Let the woman pay attention to everything that I said." Okay. I submit to you, the text says that that Manoah's wife, understandably, because she was probably fearful of her son and the purpose that he was going to have, he did not know. Samson grew up without knowing his purpose. Okay? And I can show that to you probably in another passage here as well. And this is the one that I'm going to show you, and the only one, but it runs throughout the narrative of Samson. That Samson most likely grew up without knowing his specific purpose. And because he didn't, then that had implications in the way that he handled his life. Okay, so now Samson is a grown adult. So then Samson went down to Timnah. Now Timnah is where the enemies were, and he was not supposed to go down there except if he was going to go down and fight against the Philistines. So Samson went down to Timnah, and he saw a woman in Timnah. This is the enemy territory. Okay? So one of the daughters of the Philistines. And he came back and has told his father and mother and said, "I saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. Now, therefore, go get her for me as a wife." And his father and mother said to him, "Is there no woman among the daughters of your relatives or among all of our people that you go take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me, for she looks good to me." However, his father did not know something, that it was of the Lord. For the Lord was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. Samson should have been fighting against the Philistines, not going and fraternizing or getting a wife from the Philistines. But the Lord was going to have his purpose anyway. The Lord was going to use Samson's desire for a Philistine woman to stir up a conflict between Israel and the Philistines. Okay? So Samson ultimately did not know his purpose, And even as an adult here, and if you know the story of Samson from here on out, here's what begins to happen. All of the special behaviors that Samson was given, no drinking, not consuming unclean animals or touching dead things, and cutting his hair. All of those special behaviors, Samson violated. Okay? And I submit to you for a reason. His parents did not teach him his purpose. His parents did not teach him his purpose in life. Samson grew up not knowing his purpose. And the rest of the story is God stimulating Samson to go fight against the Philistines. But it's not as the other deliverers did. Because here's my point. Okay? Christians, has God given you a special set of behaviors? Now think about that. Has God given you a special set of behaviors that's kind of different than the rest of the people? Has God given us a special set of behaviors? Say yes. So yes, he has. That reflect his righteousness and his value system. And I would say to you that those behaviors will mean nothing to us if we don't understand our purpose. Samson did not understand his purpose and his special set of behaviors, and I understand it was a Nazirite vow, but that was special behaviors that were to mark him as something different, and he grew up without knowing his purpose. Okay? So, parents, let's talk about your purpose for a moment here. Okay, so Samson grew up without knowing his purpose. He was giving a special set of behaviors, but the behaviors meant nothing to him without understanding his purpose. So, here's what you're asking. What is my purpose? Okay. What is my purpose as a parent? Is my purpose as a parent to get my children to behave? Is my purpose as a parent to make sure they become a Christian? Is my purpose as a parent, whatever it may be? Okay. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 for just a moment. Okay. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. And I'm going to bring it up here on the screen for you as well. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. And I'm going back to the beginning. And this will be your purpose in life, and this will be your purpose as a parent. Your purpose as a parent is not to make sure your children behave. Your purpose as a parent is not to make sure they have an easy life, they're well dressed, they never have a hard life. So let's think about our purpose for just a moment. And I'm going to develop this from Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over the cattle and all the earth." And God made man in his image and in his likeness. Okay? Now, I got a question for you. What does image and likeness mean? What does image and likeness mean? Okay, thoughts on what does image and likeness mean? Why don't you interact with me for just what have you heard image and likeness mean? And then I'm going to show you in context also what it means as well. But what do you think image and likeness means? What do you think? Characteristics of God. So God has a mind and a will and emotion, characteristics. So we have a mind and a will and emotion. Great, great. Okay, what else have you heard image and likeness means? Anything else? Anything else? Okay, let me show you. Okay. When Moses wrote this, the term image and likeness had a very, very clear, everybody knew what it meant because it had a very clear understanding in its context. So I'm going to do something here. I'm going to do a little illustration for us to get a visual image of this. Okay, so what does image and likeness mean? All right, and to do this, we're going to turn this auditorium into the ancient Near East for just a moment, and it's not going to be hard. Okay, it's not going to be hard. So use your understanding of geography for just a second here. So I'm standing right now in the Mediterranean Sea. If I turn this way to the north, right over here is going to be Turkey. If I turn this way to the south, where our worship team is, that's Egypt. Okay, so I'm in the Mediterranean Sea. That way is Turkey. That way is Egypt. And that means this right here. Does anybody want to guess what this is? What is this area, this landmass right here? Canaan. Way to go. So this is Canaan right here. Okay. So now, let me show you what, I'm going to show you an illustration here. Okay, so in the ancient Near East, a great king would arise. Okay, and they would go conquering the entire known world, and they were always fighting back then in the ancient Near East. By the way, are they still fighting today? They're still fighting today. So for the sake of this illustration, let's, Daniel, could you stand up and be the great king? Okay, there is great King Daniel. And in our map here, great King Daniel, let's assume he's standing around the area of Babylon. That's where they would typically arise, around that area of Babylon. And a great king would want to ultimately go conquer all the treasures of Egypt. So, Daniel, the great king, will you go conquer Egypt? Okay? And in fact, Daniel is not so great. Daniel, you know, if you went that way to Egypt, do you know just what happened to all of your armies? This is the desert. I taught you this in seminary. I taught you that in seminary, Daniel. He can't go that way. Does everybody know why he can't go that way to Egypt? Because there's a desert there. If he takes his armies that way to Egypt, there they will all die. So which way do you got to go, great king? This way. Come on this way. Come this way. He's going around the Fertile Crescent, the Tigris, and the Euphrates River, down to Egypt. But before he does, stop off and conquer Turkey. Okay? You conquered Turkey right there. Now he's the great king of Turkey. Come down here. And he's going to conquer the land of Canaan. He conquers Canaan. Okay? And then he goes down there to conquer the great riches of Egypt. And he conquers Egypt. Now, when he's ready to go back home, because he's conquered the entire known world, he's going to leave something in his place. What was your name again? Raymond. Raymond, could you stand? Okay, Raymond. And Janet, could you stand? And lady over there, could you stand? All right. Now, what the great king would do would leave a statue of himself in the worlds that he conquered. Don't they kind of look alike a little bit? Well, maybe not. And that they don't look alike either. So, Daniel, go back and enjoy your throne. Okay, and go the right way so you don't die. Okay, so the great king just conquered the entire known world, and he left something in his place. So there's a statue of him in Egypt. There's a statue of him in the land of Canaan. There's a statue of him in Turkey. When you look at the statue, what are you reminded of? You're reminded of the great king. Okay? Now, here's the point. Here's the point. Do you know what two words are used in the ancient text to describe these statues? Anybody want to guess what two words are used in the ancient Near East text to describe those statues? Image and likeness. Okay, so put all that together for just a moment. Put all that together for just a moment. The statues are visible reminders of the great king. When you look at the statues, you're supposed to remember there's a great king who's ruling. His value system is most important. His value system is most important. Okay? So when God says, let us make man in our image and our likeness, what does that mean? You are the visible representation of the greatest king ever. You are the visible representation of the invisible God. So when people look at you, they're supposed to see a reflection of God and his value system and his reign. So when people look at you as the image and likeness of God, they are supposed to see a reflection of God's value system. That is your purpose. Go ahead and have a seat, statues. Thank you for that. That is your purpose. You are the image and likeness of God. Okay? You are the visible representation of God. So when your children come out of the womb, you're the first representation of God that your children see. Okay, so I want you to let that sink in for just a second. Okay? And if you understand the concept here, you also understand this. God said in the Old Testament, he said this, make no other images of me. Make no other gods. Make no graven images. Why did God say, make no images of me? Why did he say that? Yes. Only great kings are allowed to make statues. And by the way, he already made statues, and they weren't stone statues. They were living, visible representations. He already made his image. He already made his image in us. So God already made his image. We are the image and likeness of God. And God said, make no other image of me. So your purpose, parents, our purpose is not to make sure our kids have the best education. If we can, great. But there's something greater than that. There's something greater than that. Our purpose, first and foremost, is to represent God's value system to our children. Okay? And let me show you a time where I was not. Okay? Let me show you a time where I was not with my kids. How does parenting and sleep go together? You know, especially when they're young toddlers, parenting and sleep does not go together. Okay? So our children, my daughter, you saw my daughter, she's grown now, she sleeps fine now. But there was a time where she didn't sleep fine, and therefore Daddy didn't sleep fine, and therefore Daddy was not happy. So my daughter used to struggle with something called night terrors. And so she had bad dreams, and she would begin to just wake up screaming, and when she woke up screaming, I woke up screaming. Not because I was afraid, but because I was angry. You know, and my daughter, so I would go into her room, and I would say to my crying daughter, "Stop crying!" To a daughter who was like 4 years old, and she's scared, and here comes this scary daddy in here telling her to stop crying. That doesn't make her stop crying. So my daughter actually learned how to have the right type of scream that would wake mommy up, that would not wake daddy up, because that happens so often. And I don't say this because I'm proud of this moment, but I was I was, in my parenting fail, not representing God to my child. What my daughter needed at that moment in time was compassion, tenderness, affection. That's what God does with us. Okay? But what was Daddy's goal in that? Daddy's purpose was to get my child to shut up so that I could get back to sleep. Because I love my sleep. I love my rest. I love having 8 hours of sleep per night. And she was robbing me from that. So my goal as a parent was convenience and ease and comfort. And when that was the case, I was modeling to my daughter a life where my purpose in life was ease or comfort. And I was not valuing or modeling God's value system. Okay, and let me show you something. No, I'm not going to show you. I'm just going to mention something. So if you remember the Tower of Babel story, okay, so let's stick in Genesis for just a moment. The Tower of Babel story here in Genesis chapter 11, the people of the earth gathered together and they said this, let's build a tower unto heaven. And they said, let's make a name for ourselves. Let's make a name for ourselves. By the way, our purpose, we are the visible representation of the invisible God, supposed to be making a name for God, And the Tower of Babel people said, hey, we're going to make a name for ourselves. Okay? And God came down and gave them a name. He gave them the name Babel. And if you look in your footnotes there in the Bible, in Genesis chapter 11, Babel means confusion. And I know that's where we get the confused languages. So there's English, there's Cantonese, there's Mandarin, there's Spanish. So languages came from that division there. But there was something else spiritual going on there. They confused their purpose. They confused their purpose. Instead of making a name for God, they made a name for themselves. And God gave them that name, confusion. Now here's what I want to say. Parents, if we're living for any other goal than representing our God and his value system, that brings confusion. So that night with my daughter, I was confusing. I was bringing confusion into parenting at that moment because I ceased living for my purpose. Okay? Now, so let's summarize and then we're going to sing. Summarize and then we're going to sing here in just a moment. Your purpose is not to make sure your children have the best of everything. It's not to get your children to behave. Those things will frustrate us, and we can't accomplish them anyway. Our purpose in life and in parenting, and our purpose that we're teaching our children, is you are the visible representation of the invisible God. When people look at you, they're supposed to see God's value system in you. That's what your purpose is. So that will form the basis of all of our parenting from this point on in regard to what I'm talking about. Okay? And there was only one person who ever lived fully that purpose. Jesus Christ. And the scripture calls him the perfect visible representation of the invisible God. He fulfilled that purpose when we did not. He did that when we did not. He did that for us. Colossians 1:15 says he is the image of the invisible God, and he's the perfect visible representation of the invisible God, because all of us have shifted from our purpose that God originally gave us. We shifted to making a name for ourselves, and that brings confusion. So just as the example with my daughter, when I came in and was living for myself, living for my sleep, living for my ease, that brings confusion. God would have us to nail our purpose You are the visible representation of the invisible God. So let's stop with that tonight, and then we'll pick that up in the morning and do some other additional expansion of that. So let me pray for us, and then we'll have a closing song. Okay? Father God, thank you for this time. And Father, we submit the rest of our time to you as well for studying your word together. Father, from Genesis chapter 1, you have given us our purpose. We are to represent you, and we confess, Father, that we have so often rebelled against that purpose, to try to make a name for ourselves, to try to have our children make a name for themselves so that they're filled with honor and respect and success. Father, will you help us to recognize when we've deviated from our purpose, and that you would help us to look to Christ, ultimately, who was the perfect visible representation of you, who manifested your value system perfectly. And it's in him that we ultimately can have a redeemed purpose. Father, that's what we ask of you, that you would help us as parents to understand our purpose and to begin to live that out practically. We pray these things in Christ's name. Amen.